Hello music lovers, welcome to episode 62 of What Makes This Song Special. As always, I've got a story for you that takes me back to a song, or a song that takes me back to a story. Hopefully the song's special to you. It is obviously a special one to me. I will then talk a little bit about the song itself, the band, the artist, the singer of the song, and I'll leave you a link for a part 2 that you can click on to listen to my cover version of today's song, which is what we do every week if you've tuned in before. This week's a short one. Last week I gave you a long story, quite a serious story about mental health issues and all sorts of things, and the week before I gave you a funny story. So this week it's a sort of almost a non-story, but it's a wee short one. This is just what the song takes me back to. It's not that exciting, but hopefully you'll find something in the episode that you can sort of relate to. We're going back to about 1999, 2000, millennium year, round about there. I'd not long started my first job after leaving school, and I was meeting people from different schools, different towns, different backgrounds, and we all had different stories to tell. I was washing dishes in a local country club, which I've mentioned on the channel a couple of times before on other stories. And one night after service, completely unplanned, a few of us decided to stay behind for a chat and a drink after our shifts. It's a kind of quiet midweek shift, so we're all back in our non-work clothes by about 9:30, and we sat in the bar for a couple of hours and we had a chat. As I said to most of you watching, it's a non-story this week, and to be fair, compared to some of the funny tales or ones that I've had you maybe crying or laughing in, or poignant stories, this one's just a little kind of, this is what the song reminds me of. But a daft little memory that I have. There was me, my good old pal Crawford Brown, Martin Patience, who's actually now a very successful published author, and Stuart Scott, who's still one of my best friends to this day and plays in the band with me every weekend. So before this night, none of us knew each other that well. We'd been working together for a few months at most, but it was really just kind of banter in between shifts, or no kind of serious chat. We didn't know each other that well. And that night we sat and we told each other stories about our youths and about times at school, and we regaled hilarious urban legends that had us all rolling around the floor laughing. And it was a great wee night, and the chat and the stories really made us connect with one another. And I remember looking around the bar that night, and there were a couple of tables of people finishing dinner or drinking pints, and I remember feeling really grown up. It's definitely one of the first memories that I have of feeling like a grown up. I don't know why, but it just felt like a grown-up thing to do. Even though most of the chat at the table was completely juvenile and immature, to be honest, it often still is with me and my pals, because I've got no interest in becoming one of those bitter old guys that doesn't love having a laugh at silly and immature topics. But for some reason, as I said, I remember it's one of the first times that I remember feeling like I was an adult. I'd just turned 18. I didn't need a fake ID to order or to sit in a bar. And nobody could tell me that I wasn't allowed to be there. It just felt like a kind of grown-up thing to do. And we were all in pain from laughing so much by the end of the night from the stories that were being sort of passed around the table. So that was that. Stu, he gave us all a lift home at the end of the night. And I remember asking him if he could drop me off last, because I was just savouring the chat with everybody for as long as I could. And we were in his mum's, I think it was a Renault Scenic or maybe a Citroen Picasso, sort of one of the first sort of SUV people carrier type cars that was around back then. And it was like a pitch black country road, and we were driving along and we were talking about music. And once everybody else had been dropped off or had left, I can't really remember if people drove off and other, I think, yeah, Stu was maybe the designated driver and dropped us all back off. But yeah, we talked about music. Stu, played guitar. He still does, as I mentioned before, in the band with me, and plays bass. And he was always really enthusiastic and supportive about my music and my songwriting. He kind of got it. A lot of people didn't really understand when I told them, when I was 18 years old, I'm taking a couple of years out of, higher education to try and make it as a singer-songwriter, and people just kind of went, yeah, whatever. Stu got it. He loved music, and he was always like really complimentary when I let him hear any of my songs that I'd written, any of my compositions. So, I just think for other people, probably they don't think of it as a realistic vocation in life, or they just didn't really get music. Stu kind of got it, as I say. So we get deep into conversation about bands and artists and songs, and before long we were listening to guitar solos by, bands like Iron Maiden and Guns N' Roses and all those kind of classic rock bands that we both kind of were into. And then, it was before the days of YouTube and Apple Music and Spotify, so you couldn't just say, oh, here's a great track and just find it on your phone and play it, through the car stereo. It didn't work like that. We were basically flicking through whatever CDs Stu had in the car, which were mostly his mum's. But then he said, oh, I've got a song we should listen to. And, I wish I could sound cooler and say that it was some kind of cool rock and roll track or something kind of culturally popular at the time, but it wasn't. It was an emotional ballad by a band who formed before either of us was born. But I was just completely mesmerised by the song, and it was, of course, as you'll know from the title of today's video, it was Through the Barricades by Spandau Ballet. And we just listened to it in this pitch black country road, and it was phenomenal. It was just a phenomenal song, lyrically, musically, just had so much in it that's just emotive. I've spoken about that before on previous episodes. Like what makes a song special is of course completely down to the listener. It's subjective, but something that's emotive in any way to somebody is a great song. And this was very emotive. I'd never heard it before, and it finished off a perfect night. We'd had this great wee night that wasn't planned, and we'd all had a really good time. And we all became, great friends after that, even though some of us don't see each other anymore. I'm sure we can all look back at these little moments like that in our lives that are kind of somehow special, even though they're technically nothing. As I said before, it's a bit of a non-story, but, for some reason there's something, even though they're nothing, if that makes sense. Something that just seems important for some reason that we can't quite articulate. And the song just takes me back there. It makes me think about how we probably don't appreciate those little moments enough, those little moments in life where we don't understand the importance of them until we're looking back, wishing we could, relive them one more time. We could go back there to that time, to that night, to that era of our lives and sort of just savour it, rather than sort of let it just pass us by as nothing, So a great song. That's the wee story. That's what it takes me back to. Of course, that was the first time I'd heard Through the Barricades, an incredible song by British band, as I said, Spandau Ballet. They were formed in London, 1979, and inspired by the sort of post-punk underground dance scene, they became one of the most successful groups of the kind of new romantic British pop era. In the 1980s, they sold about 25 million albums and had 23 hit singles worldwide, which is really huge. I mean, it's when I was sort of researching them for this episode, I realised they were even bigger than I probably gave them credit for. The band's classic lineup featured Gary Kemp on guitar, synthesizer, and on backing vocals. His brother Martin Kemp was on bass, vocalist Tony Hadley, we'll talk about him in a minute, saxophonist Steve Norman, and drummer John Keeble. Gary Kemp was also the band's songwriter, and Through the Barricades has actually got a really sad backstory. There was a guy called Thomas Riley who worked for the band doing sort of all of the merchandise side of things. So he was 22 years old, and his merchandising company was doing really well. He was touring with bands like Depeche Mode, Bananarama, and of course Spandau Ballet. And in August 1983, he went home to Belfast to visit his mum for 2 days and was very sadly shot and killed by a British soldier. It was during the Troubles, as they called them in Ireland, and there were parts of the island that were just extremely dangerous. And sadly, Thomas Riley was in the wrong place at the wrong time that day. A few months later, Thomas's brother, Jim Riley, who was actually the drummer in Stiff Little Fingers, another 80s band, and he was a close friend of the band, he took Gary Kemp down the famous Falls Road to see his brother's grave. And the song was kind of born there. Gary said that he had the idea for the lyric, but never wrote it until a few months later. But when he did, the whole song just kind of came together in the space of an afternoon. He just wrote it in a day. He was shocked at the barricades in the streets of Belfast, separating the Unionists from the Republicans, finding it really hard to digest at a place not too far from home. Had a real war going on just across the water. And the lyrics of the song, although they're mainly ones of love triumphing over war, there are some really sad little lyrics in there as well. There's some gems. There's a line that goes, "It's a terrible beauty we've made," which is actually from a W.B. Yeats poem called Easter 1916 about the Irish Easter Rising. So yeah, lots of little gems in the lyrics in there, and just a fantastic song. As always, at the end, I will mention the singer. This week it's Tony Hadley. Tony Hadley had a fantastic voice, has a fantastic voice. A real crooner type voice with a lovely, warm, rich tone. There's loads of bass in the sort of equalisation of his sound, which he gets from really opening up the back of the throat and dropping his larynx to create much more space for resonance. That, along with great breath support, were the sort of main factors behind that big power and quite theatrical sound that he was famous for. I also checked out some recent live videos of him, as I always do when I'm doing any vocal coach analysis, and he can absolutely still hit the notes. Really great singer, still to this day. So well done, Tony. A fantastic voice, fantastic singer. So there's my wee story today. As I said, not the most exciting story I've told on the channel, far from it, but that is what the song takes me back to. That's why the song's special to me. It reminds me of that night. It's also a special song, just musically and lyrically. I think nobody could probably deny that. But as I always say, that what makes a song special isn't always just about how great it is musically. It can be just what it means to you. It could be a really mundane, simplistic, linear, electronic track that doesn't have much in way of soul or organic musicality, but it can be just something that reminds you of something special in your life, something poignant, and I suppose that's what makes a song amazing in its own way. So yeah, new beginnings for me, turning 18, becoming a man, meeting some great friends. I had a really great little night, and there we go. Nothing really more to say about that. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. Hopefully next week I give you a more exciting story. But hit the like button, subscribe, comment. Let me know if this is a special song to you and why, and we can discuss it in the comments. And I will see you next week for another story and another song. Thank you so much.